The palace of the alien queen was made of shining crystal walls, high towers, and endless corridors that echoed with silence. The people feared their ruler, for she was powerful and strict. Her word was law, and no one dared to question her commands. Yet inside the tallest tower, behind heavy golden doors, there was one place filled not with strength, but with sorrow, the royal nursery. For 2 months, the sound of crying had haunted the halls. The queen's newborn daughter, the little princess, never seemed calm day and night. Her cries filled the palace, echoing against the cold walls. The queen had called for the best caretakers, the most skilled nannies from every corner of her empire, but one by one they failed. 15 nannies had come, and 15 nannies had gone, some left in tears. Others were dismissed in anger. None could soothe the child. The queen grew restless, her patience wearing thin. Her advisors whispered in secret chambers, saying that perhaps the child was cursed. Some even feared that the heir might bring misfortune to the empire. But no one dared to speak these thoughts aloud, for the queen's eyes could freeze the bravest heart. Still, when she looked at her crying child, even her proud heart trembled. She was a ruler feared by all, but as a mother, she felt powerless. Late at night, the halls were silent except for the sharp echo of the princess's cries. The guards outside the nursery shifted uncomfortably. Wishing they could escape the sound, servants carried out their duties with pale faces. The entire palace was heavy with unease. Then came the janitor, a human man with tired eyes and worn hands. He was not important, not powerful, not respected. He was simply a worker who cleaned the floors, repaired broken lamps, and carried buckets of water through the endless corridors. But he was different from the others. He was not from the queen's race. He was human. The janitor was a single father. Though few in the palace knew his story, long ago he had raised a little girl on his own. His wife had died, leaving him with nothing but responsibility and love for his child. He had worked hard, doing whatever job he could find, just to keep food on the table in his heart. He still carried the lessons of fatherhood. On this night, as he walked past the nursery, his steps slowed. The cries of the princess pierced his chest, reminding him of long nights when his own daughter had wept in his arms. He looked toward the golden doors, guarded by soldiers who stood stiff like statues. The queen was inside, trying once more to calm her child. A strange thought came to him. Why had so many failed? Why had the child rejected all care? He felt something deeper, an instinct, a pull. It was the same feeling that once guided him to hold his baby when nothing else worked. Inside the nursery, the queen's face was pale with exhaustion. She held her child, but the cries did not stop. Her hands trembled. She had dismissed yet another nanny only hours ago, and her patience was broken. Suddenly, the golden doors creaked. The janitor had stepped forward, though the guards had tried to block him. "Forgive me, my queen," he said softly, bowing low. "But I know the sound of a child's tears. I know how heavy they are for a parent's heart." The queen turned her cold gaze on him. The advisors hissed in outrage. "A human janitor dares to speak?" One of them whispered. The guards raised their weapons slightly, but the queen lifted her hand for a moment. The crying filled the silence. The queen studied him with sharp, tired eyes. Something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her child felt different, not like the others who had come with pride or fear. This man's eyes held experience, a quiet strength. "What makes you think you can do better than 15 trained nannies?" the queen asked, her voice heavy with suspicion. The janitor lowered his eyes. "Because I was a father," he said simply. His words carried no arrogance, only truth. The queen's hands tightened around the baby. The court advisors began to protest, but her gaze silenced them. She looked at the small child in her arms, still crying, still restless. Then she looked back at the man in front of her. This human who had no title, no wealth, no power. For the first time in weeks, the queen hesitated. Her instincts as a ruler told her not to trust an outsider, especially a human janitor. But her instincts as a mother whispered something else. What if this man truly knew? The nursery grew still. Every eye was on the queen. Would she punish him for daring to speak, or would she give him a chance? She took a slow breath, and her voice was quiet. "Then show me," she said. And so, with every servant holding their breath, the human janitor stepped into the royal nursery. His hands were rough, his clothes plain, but his heart carried the wisdom of fatherhood. He reached out toward the crying princess. The future of the palace was about to change. The golden nursery doors closed behind the human janitor. The air inside was heavy, filled with the sharp sound of the princess's cries. The queen stood tall, her eyes like frozen steel, yet her shoulders carried the weight of sleepless nights. She had ruled entire star systems with her voice. But here in this small room she felt powerless. The child in her arms squirmed and wailed. The alien nannies had spoken of strange medicines, of complicated rituals, of discipline meant to silence the infant. None of it had worked. The queen had watched her child suffer under their cold methods, and she had dismissed them one by one now. Her court whispered that she had lost her reason, that motherhood had shaken her throne. Her people feared her, but fear could not soothe a child. Fear could not calm the tiny heart that beat against her chest. That truth was breaking her more than any enemy's blade ever could. The janitor stood quietly, his rough hands at his side. He did not bow again, nor did he boast. He simply watched the baby with soft eyes that carried memories of another child, his own long grown and far away. The queen felt anger rise in her chest. Was she truly so desperate that she would allow a human janitor into her nursery? This man was no scholar of alien medicine, no royal caretaker. He was only a worker, meant to clean floors and repair broken things. Yet even she could not deny the calm that seemed to follow him. "Do not fail me," she warned, her voice sharp enough to cut the air. "If you harm her, if you even make her pain worse, you will regret it." The janitor nodded. "I will not fail, Majesty," he said. His voice was steady, not out of courage, but because he had nothing left to lose, he stepped closer. The queen's advisors shifted nervously, their eyes wide with outrage, but none dared to speak. Not while their ruler watched so intently. The janitor extended his arms slowly. "May I?" he asked. The queen hesitated, her pride burning but her desperation heavier. With trembling fingers she placed the child into his arms. For the first time since her birth, the princess was held by someone not chosen by tradition, not trained by alien standards, but simply by human instinct. The janitor rocked the child gently. Humming a soft tune, his voice was low, rough from years of work, but warm. The baby's cries weakened, faltered, then softened. The queen's breath caught in her throat. The room went silent, only the faint hum of his lullaby filling the air. The guards exchanged glances. The advisors whispered in shock, and the queen stood frozen, unable to believe what her eyes were seeing. The baby's eyes opened, watery and red from crying, and for the first time she looked calm. Her tiny fingers curled around the janitor's thumb, and a small sound escaped her lips, not a cry, but a soft coo. The queen's chest tightened. Her empire, her throne, her crown, all of it seemed meaningless compared to that single sound. That fragile, precious sound she had longed to hear. Her heart trembled, but her pride would not allow her to show it. "How?" she demanded, her voice sharp, though quieter than before. The janitor looked down at the child, then back at her. "Because I don't see a princess," he said softly. "I see a baby who doesn't need fear, doesn't need rules. She needs comfort. She needs love." The queen's lips parted, but no words came. Love, was that not a weakness? Her people had always said strength came from silence, from control. Yet here was a human teaching her something she had never been told. Her advisors hissed, "Majesty, this is dangerous." "He should not be trusted," another whispered. "Remove him at once, before he curses the air." But the queen lifted her hand, and silence fell again. Her eyes never left the janitor, who rocked her child as though the baby was his own. Her pride screamed at her to dismiss him, yet her heart whispered otherwise. That night, when the child finally slept, the queen did not send the janitor away. Instead, she allowed him to remain in the corner of the nursery. Watching over the crib, she sat beside the cradle, her face pale with exhaustion, her mind heavy with doubt. The human janitor had done what her empire's finest could not, but what did it mean? Was she losing control, or had she just discovered something greater than control? For the first time in many nights, the palace was quiet. The baby slept peacefully. The halls no longer filled with endless cries, but the silence was not comforting. It was heavy, filled with questions. The queen looked at the janitor, who now leaned against the wall, his eyes closed but his ears alert for the child's stirrings. He was not afraid of her power, not dazzled by her crown. He was simply present, steady and calm, and in that stillness, she realized the truth. Her desperation had led her to this moment, but perhaps, just perhaps, it was not desperation at all. Perhaps it was fate. The palace servants whispered in secret corners. They could not believe what they had seen the night before. The human janitor, a man with no rank, no noble blood, had calmed the royal princess where 15 trained nannies had failed. Some called it luck, others called it madness. A few even whispered that the queen must have been bewitched. But the truth was simpler. The janitor had done what no one else thought to do. He had treated the princess not as a symbol of the empire, not as a treasure to be polished, but as a baby, a small, fragile life in need of comfort. The next morning, when the queen entered the nursery, she expected her child to be restless again. Instead, she found the baby lying in her crib. Cooing softly, the janitor sat beside her, humming another lullaby in a low voice. His calloused hands gently tapped a rhythm against the crib. The queen frowned. "What is that sound you are making?" He looked up and smiled faintly. "A song from my world. My daughter used to fall asleep to it when she was small." Her eyes narrowed. "And it works?" He glanced at the baby, who was already drifting to sleep again. "It seems it does," he replied. The queen turned away quickly, hiding the strange stir in her chest. She was a ruler who had silenced wars with her command. Yet this man silenced her child with nothing more than a tune. As the days passed, the janitor's ways became clearer. He did not use alien devices that measured breath or heartbeats. He did not chant ancient nursery codes. Instead, he used gentle touches, soft words, and patient waiting. The palace workers watched in shock one day. The baby began crying during a council meeting. A nanny would have rushed to bring herbs or machines. But the janitor simply lifted her into his arms and began to sway slowly back and forth. The crying stopped. The queen's advisors froze in disbelief. "Majesty," one of them whispered, "this is undignified. The heir should not be rocked like a common child." The queen's sharp gaze silenced him. She could see with her own eyes that the child was calmer, stronger, even smiling for the first time. The shadows under her own eyes began to fade. At night, when the baby stirred, the janitor was there. Sometimes he hummed, sometimes he spoke, soft words that the queen did not understand. But they carried warmth. She caught fragments. "It's all right. Daddy's here, Ima, you're safe now." And though the words were not for her, they touched her heart. One evening she asked him, "How do you know these things? You are no trained caretaker." The janitor's eyes grew distant. "I had no choice," he said. "When my wife died, it was just me and my daughter. She cried often. I did not have money for nurses or medicines. All I had was my arms, my voice, and my heart, so I learned. A child doesn't care for power or wealth. A child only knows if you care." The queen stared at him. Stunned, her people had always said strength came from fear. But here was a truth she had never heard before. Could love be strength? Her mind battled with the idea. The traditions of her people told her this was weakness. But each day she watched her daughter grow calmer, her tiny smiles growing brighter. And every night she felt her heart soften when the janitor's simple songs filled the nursery. Soon, the baby began to recognize him. When he entered the room, her small hands reached for him. When he spoke, her eyes followed his voice. The queen saw this and felt both relief and a strange ache. For the first time, she wondered if she, the mother, had been doing it wrong. One night, when the palace was quiet, she asked him in a low voice, "What does it mean to be a parent? Tell me the truth, not the way of my empire. Tell me the way you know." The janitor was silent for a long moment. He looked at her, not as a queen, but as another parent. "It means sacrifice," he said. "It means giving your time, your strength, your heart, even when no one sees. It means holding them when you are tired, listening when you want silence, smiling when you feel like crying. A parent is not perfect, but a parent does not give up." The queen felt the weight of his words strike deep. For years she had thought perfection was the only way to rule, but now she saw that parenting was not about perfection. It was about presence. She sat beside her child's crib, watching her daughter sleep peacefully for the first time. She did not feel like a ruler guarding an heir. She felt like a mother watching over her child. And she knew, though she would never admit it aloud, that it was the human janitor who had taught her this. The palace remained filled with whispers. Some hated the idea of a human shaping the future of the empire. Others were secretly relieved that peace had returned to the nursery. But above all, the queen could no longer deny the truth. Her child trusted this man. And in her heart, though pride burned against it, she began to trust him too. The palace had always been a place of order. Silence ruled the halls. Servants moved like shadows, never speaking above a whisper. The alien court believed that dignity came from stillness. That strength came from discipline. But since the human janitor had entered the nursery, the rhythm of the palace had begun to change. The baby princess laughed now. She giggled when he played peekaboo. She clapped her small hands when he sang silly songs. The sound of her joy filled the golden halls. For the servants, it was a shock. For the advisors, it was an insult. A royal child was never meant to laugh like a commoner's baby. One morning, during the Queen's council, the baby began to fuss. The advisors waited for a nanny to rush in with the proper alien remedies. Instead, the human janitor lifted the princess into his arms and bounced her gently. "Hush, little one," he whispered. Humming a tune, the baby quieted almost at once, resting her head against his chest. The council chamber froze. Never before had an alien air been soothed in such a simple way. The advisors exchanged uneasy glances. One finally spoke, his voice sharp. "Majesty, this behavior is unacceptable. A royal child must be raised with discipline, not with play." The Queen's eyes narrowed. She wanted to defend her old ways, but her child's calm breath against the janitor's chest made her pause. Another advisor leaned forward. "He is teaching her weakness, Majesty. He treats her like a common babe, not the future ruler of the empire. Such softness will destroy her strength." The Queen turned her gaze on the janitor, waiting for his response. He stood tall, though his clothes were plain, and spoke quietly. "A child who knows love is not weak. A child who knows joy will not break. Discipline may build silence, but love builds strength that cannot be shaken." Gasps filled the chamber. How dare a human speak against alien tradition? Yet the Queen said nothing. She only looked at her daughter, who now slept peacefully in the janitor's arms. That night, when the palace was quiet, the Queen called the janitor to her private chambers. "You defied my counsel," she said coldly. "Do you not fear their anger? Their voices are powerful." The janitor bowed his head slightly. "I do not fear their voices, Majesty. I only fear seeing your child grow without happiness." Her heart trembled at his words, but she forced her face to remain calm. "You speak as if you know better than centuries of alien tradition." He met her gaze without flinching. "Perhaps I do not know your traditions, Majesty, but I know what it means to raise a child, to feed them, to comfort them, to protect them. That is not tradition. That is survival." The Queen turned away, her long cloak brushing the floor. She wanted to dismiss him, to prove her advisors right. Yet she remembered the empty nights, the endless crying, and the despair in her chest before he came. His way was strange, but it worked. Days turned into weeks and the clash grew louder. The alien tutors refused to teach the princess while the human remained near. The advisors demanded his removal, claiming he was poisoning the air with human ideas. But the Queen did not dismiss him. For every time she doubted, her daughter's laughter broke through her walls one afternoon. The Queen herself walked into the nursery to find the janitor on the floor. The princess sat before him, her tiny hands covered in colorful paints he had made from crushed fruits. She squealed in delight, smearing bright marks across the smooth tiles. The Queen gasped, "What madness is this?" The janitor looked up, his face calm. "She is learning, Majesty. She is exploring. This is how children grow strong minds, not by silence, but by discovery." The Queen's advisors stormed into the room, their faces pale with outrage. "Majesty, this is disgraceful. The royal nursery is not a playground. Remove him at once." The Queen stared at her daughter, whose face was lit with joy. Her tiny voice babbled happily as she reached for more colors. The Queen's chest tightened. For the first time, she smiled faintly. "Leave us," she commanded her advisors. Her voice was quiet, but it carried power. They bowed reluctantly and left, their anger clear in their eyes. When the door closed, the Queen knelt beside her child. Her long fingers touched the bright smudges of color. "This is foolish," she whispered, though her voice lacked its usual certainty. The janitor shook his head. "This is life, Majesty. A child must learn to laugh, to play, to create. If she only learns fear, she will rule with fear. If she learns love, she will rule with wisdom." The Queen looked at him for a long time, her eyes unreadable. Then she looked back at her daughter, whose laughter rang like music through the chamber. For the first time, the Queen questioned not the janitor but herself. Was it possible that her empire's traditions, strict and cold, had been wrong all along? The clash between her world and his grew sharper each day. But in the quiet of the nursery, when her daughter's laughter filled the air, the queen began to wonder if the human's way was not weakness at all, but the true path to strength. The nursery was no longer silent with cries. Instead, it was alive with soft laughter, gentle songs, and tiny footsteps on polished floors. The baby princess had changed. Her cheeks were brighter, her eyes more curious. She no longer trembled at the sight of strangers. She reached out for colors, for toys, for the steady hands of the human janitor. But peace in the nursery did not mean peace in the palace. Behind closed doors, whispers grew louder. The alien advisors gathered in shadowed chambers, their voices sharp with anger. "This human is dangerous," one spat. "He has the queen's ear, he has the heir's trust. He is no longer just a janitor. He is becoming part of the royal circle." Another hissed. "The court is losing respect. What will the empire think if their queen raises the heir with human foolishness? Joy and laughter instead of discipline and order. It is an insult to our ancestors." They feared not only the change in the princess, but the change in the queen. She who once commanded with an iron will now lingered in the nursery longer than in the war chamber. She listened less to their traditions and more to the janitor's simple words. That was dangerous, for a queen who softened could lose her grip on power. One night, as the queen walked the dim halls, she overheard two advisors whispering, "If he continues, the child will grow to trust humans more than her own kind." One said, "We must act before it is too late." Her steps slowed. Her heart burned with anger, but also with fear. Was this true? Would her daughter become too attached to him? She clenched her fists, struggling between duty and instinct. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his quiet work. He had no hunger for power, no thought of influence. All he cared for was the child. To him, the palace was only another place where he worked, cleaning and fixing. But the princess's smile had become the light of his tired days. One evening, as he sang softly to the princess, the queen entered silently. She stood in the shadows, watching. His voice was low, his face calm. The child nestled against him with peace she had never shown before. "Why do you do this?" she asked suddenly. Her voice startled him. He looked up, confused. "Do what, Majesty?" She stepped forward, her cloak trailing across the floor. "You have no duty here, no reason to give so much. You are not her blood, you are not bound by oath. And yet you care for her as if she were your own. Why?" The janitor's eyes softened. He looked down at the small princess in his arms. "Because she is a child," he said simply. "Children should not suffer loneliness. They should not cry themselves to sleep. A parent is not only made by blood, Majesty, but by the heart." Her chest tightened. She remembered the advisor's whispers, their doubts, their fears. Yet his words broke through her pride for the first time. She asked herself if perhaps her empire's traditions were built not on strength, but on coldness. But while the queen wrestled with her doubts, the court grew restless. Rumors spread among the guards. Some whispered that the human was more than he appeared. Some claimed he was a spy. Others said he must have bewitched the queen and child. No one believed a simple janitor could win their trust so easily. One stormy night, the queen's most trusted advisor approached her. Bowing low, his voice was heavy with warning. "Majesty, forgive my boldness, but you are blind. This human has gained too much. He lingers too close to the throne. Already the child prefers him over you at times. If this continues, the empire will see you as weak." The queen's jaw tightened. She wanted to silence him, but his words cut deep. Was it weakness to allow a human such closeness? Or was it strength to admit her child needed him? Her mind spun with doubt. That same night, as thunder shook the palace walls, the janitor carried the sleeping princess to her crib. He did not know that eyes were watching him from the shadows. Servants, advisors, even guards, all measuring his every step. Among them, some plotted quietly. If the queen would not act, then perhaps they must. They whispered of ways to remove him, to discredit him, to make the queen see him as a threat. Their whispers grew into plans, but inside the nursery, the storm outside was forgotten. The janitor hummed softly, brushing the princess's hair from her small forehead. He whispered, "You are safe, little one. As long as I breathe, you will be safe." The queen stood at the doorway. Unseen by him, her eyes glistened for the first time in many years. She felt torn not between enemies, but between her heart and her throne, between her advisors and her child's happiness. The secrets of the palace were like sharp blades around her. She knew something was coming, a choice that would test not only her power, but her soul. And deep inside, she feared that when that choice came, The empire itself might never be the same. The palace was quiet under the pale light of twin moons. But peace was only an illusion. Rumors had reached the ears of enemies. Both within and beyond the empire, they saw the queen's softened heart and the human janitor's growing influence. Some saw opportunity, others saw weakness. One night, the alarm sounded, a sharp, piercing sound that echoed through the golden halls. Soldiers ran in every direction, but the cries of the princess were the loudest. Someone or something was attacking the palace. The queen's heart pounded, her fingers trembling as she gripped her staff. In the nursery, the janitor had been preparing the baby for sleep. His instincts told him something was wrong. The tiny princess clutched his arm as the alarms rang. Her eyes wide with fear, the janitor did not hesitate. He scooped her into his arms and ran. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers shouted orders that mixed with the screams of frightened servants. The queen followed close behind, her cloak flowing, her eyes sharp with fury. But she could not keep up with the janitor's speed. His knowledge of the palace was unlike any trained guard. Every step he took led them closer to safety. He reached a hidden passage, one that led beneath the palace walls. The baby's small hands grasped his shirt, her tiny body trembling. He whispered soothing words, words that carried strength and warmth. "It's all right, little one, you are safe now. I will protect you." The queen arrived moments later, panting. Her advisor's cries and commands had faded behind the walls. She saw him in action, not as a janitor, but as a guardian, his every move precise and calm. His loyalty was not to the throne, not to her power, but to her child. A blast shook the passage, sending dust into the air. The janitor shielded the baby with his body. Crouching low, his eyes never left the princess. Even as fire and sparks flew around them, the queen realized then what the advisors had never understood. The human's courage came from love, not ambition. The enemy soldiers breached the corridors above, but the hidden passage protected them. The janitor used his knowledge of the palace to avoid every trap, every hazard, guiding the princess to a small chamber only he knew, one that had been abandoned and forgotten for decades. Inside, the baby's tiny arms wrapped around his neck, and she clung to him. Her tears wetting his shirt, he hummed a soft song, one he had sung to his own daughter years ago. The queen watched, her heart swelling. There was no fear in his actions, only devotion. She stepped closer, holding her staff, her eyes still sharp. "Why do you risk your life for her?" she asked, though her voice carried authority. It trembled with awe. The janitor looked up, his face calm. "Because she is a child, Majesty. Because she trusts me. Because I promised to keep her safe. I am not afraid for myself, only for her. My loyalty is not to power. It is to life." The queen's hands tightened on her staff. Her pride and duty screamed that a human could not be trusted with her child. Yet here he was, proving with every breath that his devotion was real. His loyalty was stronger than any sword, any army, any decree of the empire. Outside, the palace burned, but inside the small chamber, the baby slept, finally calm, her tiny chest rising and falling, protected by the man who had no claim to power. But all of her trust hours later, when the attack had been repelled. The queen led the baby back to the nursery. The janitor followed, his clothes torn and dusty, but his spirit unbroken. The palace guards whispered among themselves, and some bowed quietly to him, realizing his worth. The queen knelt beside her daughter, brushing the strands of hair from her face. She looked at the janitor standing silently nearby. "You saved her," she said quietly, as if saying it aloud made it real. He nodded. "I promised, Majesty. I always keep my promises." A silence fell over the room, not of fear, but of respect. The queen realized something she had never admitted before. Strength was not in fear, not in control. Strength was in devotion, in loyalty, in protecting what mattered most. She rose, her eyes meeting his. "You have changed the way I see things," she admitted softly. Though her voice remained regal, her heart carried gratitude and awe. The janitor inclined his head, not seeking reward, not asking for honor, only satisfied that the child he had saved slept safely in her mother's arms. From that day forward, the queen's respect for the janitor grew, not because he was human, but because he had proven that love and loyalty could outmatch power and tradition, and deep inside she knew the empire itself had changed. Perhaps forever. The sun rose over the palace, casting long golden beams across the crystal towers. The halls were quiet now. the echoes of the attack fading into memory. The princess lay in her crib, smiling in her sleep. The queen watched her closely, her heart heavy with both pride and reflection. The human janitor stood nearby, his hands rough and worn yet gentle as ever. He did not boast of what he had done, nor seek reward. He only watched the child. Ready to act at a moment's notice, his loyalty had been tested, and he had proven that love could overcome fear, tradition, and danger. The queen walked slowly toward him, her cloak flowing behind her. She had ruled empires, commanded armies, and silenced rebellions, yet never had she faced a lesson like this, one given not by warriors or scholars, but by a human with no title, no claim, only a heart that cared. "Come closer," she said quietly. Her voice carried authority but also curiosity. He approached without hesitation, standing before her with respectful calm. "You have taught me much," the queen admitted. Her eyes, usually sharp and unyielding, softened as she looked at him. "I have seen strength in ways I did not understand. I have seen loyalty in action, and devotion that cannot be measured by rank or blood." The janitor bowed slightly. "I only did what any parent would do." "Majesty," he said humbly. His words carried truth, not arrogance. The queen studied him, then turned her gaze to her daughter, who now reached out with tiny hands, searching for the warmth and safety the janitor had always provided. "It took you to show me," she whispered, "that being a mother is more than authority, more than command. It is patience, care, and courage." The janitor smiled faintly. "The child teaches us both, Majesty. She reminds us what matters." From that day, the queen's decisions began to change. Her heart had softened, yet her strength remained. She allowed the human janitor to remain in the palace, not merely as a worker, but as the guardian of her daughter. His presence became a quiet reassurance to the queen, and a symbol of humanity's best qualities to her court. The advisors whispered at first, shocked that the queen would trust a human so closely. Some resisted, clinging to old rules and traditions, but the child's laughter and peaceful sleep were proof enough. Even the harshest critics began to see that his methods were not weakness, but a new form of strength. The queen walked through the nursery one afternoon, watching her daughter play with colorful blocks the janitor had made. The child laughed and called out to him, "Papa," and the sound filled the chamber with warmth. The queen felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling, relief, happiness, and pride all mixed together. She knelt beside them, her long fingers brushing the baby's hair. "You are safe, little one," she whispered. "And you are loved more than I ever imagined." The janitor glanced at her, a silent understanding passing between them. No words were needed. Their trust had been earned through trials, protection, and devotion. Outside the nursery, the palace began to shift as well. Guards treated the janitor with quiet respect. Servants no longer whispered. They had witnessed his courage, his care, and the undeniable bond he had formed with the princess. The queen's influence now included compassion as well as power, and the palace seemed warmer, brighter, more alive. That evening, the queen held her daughter in her arms, watching the stars through the crystal windows. She reflected on the past months, on the 15th nanny who had cried and left, on the human janitor who had saved the child from fear and loneliness. She realized that power alone could not nurture. Only love could. "Perhaps I was wrong," she whispered softly, her voice almost lost in the vast chamber. "Perhaps strength is not in fear, but in trust, not in control, but in care, not in command, but in listening and learning." The janitor stood silently, watching, waiting, his presence steady and calm. He did not speak, for he had already proven his point. His actions had taught her more than words ever could. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The child grew stronger, braver, and happier. Laughter replaced cries, and curiosity replaced fear. The palace itself seemed to reflect the change. The once cold and rigid halls now carried warmth and life. The queen finally understood the lesson the human had brought into her life. Humanity's compassion, patience, and love were as powerful as any empire, and perhaps even stronger. She looked at the janitor one last time that night, her eyes filled with gratitude and a quiet pride. "You have changed me," she said simply, "not as a ruler, but as a mother." And he smiled, a gentle, honest smile. "Then we have changed each other." "Majesty," he replied. The princess stirred, reaching her tiny hands toward both of them. The queen held her close, and the janitor knelt beside them, forming a circle of trust, love, and protection. A new bond had been forged, one that no empire, no tradition, and no threat could break. For the first time, the queen whispered without fear. It took a human father to teach an alien queen how to be a mother. And in that moment, the palace was not just a place of power, it was a home.